Hello and good morning. Welcome. This is the live stream of the Crannog Talk. And good morning. Hope you're well. It is 11 a.m. on this glorious Saturday morning. I'm a little bit jealous because I'm actually indoors right now, whereas the other side of my camera screen is very much on the outside of the world. And I'm quite jealous of the location as well. We are joined this morning by Jason Oliver from the Scottish Crannog Centre. Myself, I'm Matt from Rainbow Heartlands Pink Saltire. I identify as pronouns he, they. And Jason, good morning to you. How are you?
I'm very, very well, thank you. The sun's out here and it's really peaceful by the loch, and I'm looking down the loch and I can see snow on top of the mountains, and the loch is still. It's absolutely perfect day. Thank you so much for inviting me.
No, it's wonderful to have you. And again, I'm very jealous of that location. I feel I should be there right now as well. But yeah, it's really good to see you this morning. We're quite excited because we get to find out a lot about, what you're doing there. Obviously, sort of Crannog Centre has been around for a while now, and obviously, it's got a lot of history there as well that you're sort of here to share with us this morning. What have you got in store for us this morning then?
I'm going to do a PowerPoint presentation which really introduces the Crannog Centre, why it's so important. I think the hidden history at the bottom of the loch. I think also the power of the collection we've got here. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the diversity at the Crannog and why that's so important. Events, workshops, things that are coming up, and also about our new museum over the other side of the loch. So quite a bit. So it will be quite fast paced, but hopefully there's a lot of information in there. So thank you very much.
Fantastic. Well, if there's any questions or comments you have in the audience, please do not hesitate to get in touch with us. The comment section is on the YouTube live stream. I will stop on the Heartland.rgbt website. You can also email us as well. Our email is hello@heartlands.rgbt. Any questions, any comments you got, just let us know and we'll get around to them toward the end of this video stream. This will take around about an hour for the video stream today, and we've got loads to get through. So, Jason, without further ado, please do take it away. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just get my screen share going. Brilliant. So that went really smoothly. Good. Hope that set the tone. So yeah, as I said to Matt earlier on, welcome to the Scottish Crannog Centre where I am today. As I said, it's a beautiful day to be outside. My name is Jason and I'm one of the interpreters at the site. So I show people around the museum, around the collection, and I also do ancient textile research and experimental archaeology. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little while. So as I said also, I'm going to talk a little bit about our museum. The kind of precious objects that can be found at the bottom of the loch, what we do at the museum, and why everybody on this call will be welcome to come along. So firstly, what is a crannog? Well, a crannog is an artificial island on water. They're built from the Neolithic times, so kind of 9,000 years ago, to the late medieval period. And they're found in Scotland, Ireland, and Wales, but they're not found in England for some reason. But I'm not going to cover the whole of history. Our focus is the Iron Age, which is from 800 BC to about 400 AD. In England, the Iron Age ended a little bit sooner because of the Roman invasion there. So you can see here, there is a reconstruction of a crannog. It was built 25 years ago, and as you can see, it is a house on stilts that were built out in the water. So we'll talk a little bit about why people did that in a little while. But you can imagine that if you lived during the Iron Age and people were mainly travelling around on the water, on the lochs, they didn't have roads, obviously at the side of the loch, this would be quite an imposing sight to see these. So I'll show you where they're distributed in Scotland. So there are 500 crannogs dotted around around Scotland. You can see a lot out on Harrison Lewis. I don't know where everybody's coming in from today, but you'll be able to find out where you are on this map. Harrison Lewis Neolithic ones, they were made of stone, and they were maybe used for storing animals or crops, something like that. That's not our focus today. Southwest of Scotland, you've got the medieval ones, and our focus today is the Iron Age one, so that's the rest of Scotland. So on the left-hand side, you can see Loch Lomond there. There are 15 crannogs on Loch Lomond. There are 21 on Loch Orr, and there are 17, maybe 18 on Loch Tay. So how do we find out about the Iron Age in Scotland? The Iron Age buildings don't tend to survive on the land at all. They just rot away. So we need to go down to the bottom of the loch, because on Loch Tay, there is a layer of clay and peat at the bottom, and anything that falls into that will survive. So any organic remains, basically, so things like wood, textiles, seeds, nuts, etc., are found at the bottom of the loch. So there was an excavation 40 years ago on a single crannog called Oakbank Crannog. I'll try and point that out to you on the map. I don't know if you can see that there. You can see the cursor, but it's just here. So this is an underwater excavation. You can see that there is some scaffolding out in the loch. So that's about 10 meters out in the loch. And you have got divers going down to the bottom of the loch to find this crannog that has collapsed down at the end of its life. So if you can imagine a house on stilts, after 200 years of it being inhabited, it falls down to the bottom of the loch and the roof sits on top of it. So the divers need to go down, they need to peel off the roof, they need to peel off the living area, then they'll get to the floor, and then they'll get to the stumps underneath. And over the 200-year period of the life of the crannog, things have fallen through the floor. So that's what these people are going to look at. So here is Oakbank Crannog. You can see the shape of it there. The original excavation, they thought it was just circular. Now, this excavation continued over many years. And they also found this area here, which could have been a jetty. It was slightly lower than the rest of the crannog. If you're trading, this is ideal to bring things onto the crannog. These black dots here are the piles or the stilts that stick out of the water. And over here, I think this is a funny name, but we've got wiggle match sample 1, wiggle match sample 3. If you're trying to date a site, you will pick various areas over the site. So you might do one here, one here, one here, and that will give you an average. So these wiggle match samples gave us a date of 490 BC. So over on the left-hand side, you can see how difficult it is working at the bottom of the loch. They've got head torches on there, but as soon as you go down to the bottom of the loch, all the peat stirs up. So you're basically working in pitch black. And the archaeologists go down to the bottom of the loch and they basically draw a grid at the bottom of the loch and they excavate each area. So they might pick this area, this area, this area, and they will use these things that look like vacuum cleaners. They will suck up all the items in each square, and then they will remake that on the land. So you get a map of what's happening at the bottom of the loch. This is not a job I'd like to do. I'm glad I work on the land because I think these kind of conditions are very, very difficult to work in. So this is the drawing that is formed when they bring up the stuff from the bottom of the loch. So imagine this is the bed of the loch, and then this is the layers of wood going down and all the artifacts. And they make very highly detailed drawings of what they find at the bottom of the loch. So lots of wood, as you can see here. So, as I said, people drop things through the floor. And this built up a huge mound of objects, 2 meters deep after the crannog collapsed. And then the house fell down on top of that. So as I said at the beginning, organic remains survived because there's no oxygen or light at the bottom of the loch. So any organic remains falling into that, it's almost like pressing pause on history. They're just waiting there for someone to discover them 2,500 years later. So let's have a look at some of the objects that have survived. So you can see this from our reconstruction here. You've got these piles going into the bed of the loch, and they are screwed in. So a pile would be floated out on the water. It's very definitely a community effort, 9 meters long. They are upended and then they're screwed down. And maybe you can do two or three of these per day. So here are our artifacts in the museum. They are held in glass tubes, very, very low light, so they don't disintegrate. Just for context, these are about maybe 4 foot long, something like that. So this here, where my mouse is, this is the bed of the loch, and this is how far down they go. And you can see that people have shaped the bottom of the piles that they screw in. You know, we've got these wonderful objects at the museum, and they're really impressive. But for me, I really like it when you can see evidence of human interaction. So these little cutout lines here, this is tool marks. So this is actually someone working with an axe. I find this more fascinating than this piece of wood, actually. But there you go. It's that connection back to people of the past. So let's have a look at some of the other organic objects that survived at the bottom of the loch. We have this, the butter dish. This would originally have been square. It's got 4 holes in the bottom, and to make butter you whisk up your milk, and for about 20 to 30 minutes, and eventually it splits into butter and buttermilk, and you put this kind of congealed mass into a muslin, and you squeeze the muslin cloth, and the buttermilk falls to the bottom and the butter sits on the top. And we know it's a butter dish because we found remnants of butter on the inside, which looks like black soil now, but that's our evidence that this was a butter dish. This is a quernstone. You use this for grinding grain. So you take another round stone, you put your grain onto there, move backwards and forwards, and the grain splits. This is a very, very soft stone, but it's got garnet inclusions that stick up. And as you grind your grain on this, you will get fragments of rock coming off it. So all the bread that people had back in the Iron Age had granite in it, or it had a very hard rock inside. So you found that people's teeth would grind down. So that's not ideal. Over here in the bottom left, we've got a wooden plate. Again, we've got evidence of tool marks here. Again, I love that kind of thing. You can just imagine someone sitting there carving this plate out. Almost decorative, really beautiful. In the bottom right, we've got seeds and nuts. We've got acorns here that have been nibbled by a squirrel. And we've got kind of blueberries, different kind of seeds and nuts there. And I think they almost look fresh. You know, I think the quality of the preservation is so high. With this, we also found something called cloudberry seeds. Cloudberries only grow 300 feet up. We found them on all of the crannogs on Loch Tay. So that means at some point people are going up into the hills and staying there till the end of the summer, driving their animals up into the hills. So we think this is where we get the idea of the 6-week summer holiday now that people still have from school. So there you go. We've got that connection back to the Iron Age. So what else were people doing? Well, they were highly skilled. As we move into the Iron Age, anyone that was near iron ore that was coming out of the landscape, you can scrape that off the landscape and you make iron. The Bronze Age bronze is made from tin and copper. The only place you can get tin from is Wales or Cornwall. So that's very difficult. If you're living up in Scotland, you're trying to make bronze, you're going to have to trade with people hundreds of miles away. Whereas once we get into the Iron Age, it makes things a lot simpler. Things become democratized. So this stuff here is called slag, and this is a byproduct of iron production. Why this was out in the middle of the loch, we don't know. You're not going to making iron in the middle of the loch because you're using a furnace that gets up to 1300 degrees centigrade. This is a charcoal that could be used to fill up the furnace. Sorry, my dog's barking in the background here. Little crucibles. These are used for making very, very fine objects, like jewelry, for example. And then here we have an iron knife. This isn't very long, maybe 4 or 5 inches. And this would be used for maybe gutting fish or cutting pieces of textile, maybe pieces of cotton. But this tells us that the people who are living on the Crannog were highly skilled people. Okay, next slide. There we go. I'll just go back one. I missed one there. Okay. So how do you make iron in the Iron Age? Well, you have these big things called chimneys here. The iron ore, which looks like clay, kind of seeps out of the landscape. You gather it up and you layer it in a furnace with the iron ore, charcoal, and you have some bellows at the bottom which pump in air, and you have to keep going for maybe 8 hours, something like that, constantly topping it up with iron ore and charcoal. You can see the temperature. That's going to be very high. You're not going to want to be doing this on the Crannog. So as I said, why did they have this charcoal and iron ore out 5-10 meters out into the water? Finally, you end up with this. So this is your piece of iron. You give this to your blacksmith, who would then make it into knives, as you saw on the previous slide. Some of the other objects we've got. This is a wooden measuring spoon. Again, this is maybe about 12 inches long, used for scooping stuff. As you can see, this spoon is slightly twisted, and that's just because it's been sitting at the bottom of the loch for 2,500 years. This again is a wooden whistle, remarkable level of preservation. It didn't work, which is why we think they might have just thrown it over the side of the Crannog. This is made from dogwood, and this might have been used for maybe calling sheep, or it could be a child's toy, something like that. We have these, which are pine tapers. You use these to move fire from one place to the next. Pine has a lot of resin in it. So if you get the branch and light it, It's like a match. So they don't really, it's not really used for a light source. It's not very good for that, but definitely moving fire from one place to the next. Over on the right here, we have a foot plough. Originally, this sort of had a metal shoe on the end. You hold this end and then you kick this along. It's really hard work. I had a go with one probably about 2 years ago. I could do it for about maybe a minute and I was exhausted. So this is telling us that the people who lived on the Crannog were farmers. This here is a lyre bridge. So if anybody doesn't know what a lyre is, imagine a guitar, the bridge that holds the strings up. And this is used to, Rich, can you possibly call Sky up? Sorry. So this is used to hold the strings of the lyre in place. And this has not come from Scotland. So this has either come from Scandinavia or the Mediterranean. So that's telling us that these people were, not only did they trade locally, it was also nationally and internationally, and they had a musical culture. We found lots of pottery, as you would expect in an Iron Age site. People were just throwing their pots over the edge of the Crannog, or maybe they cracked and they fell through. You can see this massive amount of pottery here. Here you can see some food remains on the inside of the pot. So maybe they didn't wash their pots properly, but that helps us as archaeologists because we can analyze these food remains and it tells us what people are eating. And again, here's this thing about human connection. This was a decoration on the outside of one of the pots, and it is fingerprints. And when people come to the museum, you're all invited. You can actually put your finger into these fingerprints and directly connect back to the communities of 2,500 years ago. Smaller decorative items. So here we've got some wooden toggles. They are very small. This one's about a centimetre long. This longer one could be used for maybe holding a light wooden cloak together. And again, a toggle at the top. This here is maybe the size of an eggshell. And you are using this to melt down copper or bronze to make jewelry, or silver. And you can actually see some of the metal still on the inside. This is a bead from Wigan. This here is another crucible for melting down metal. I don't know if you can see this tiny, tiny blue bead here. It's so small, it's difficult to take a picture of. This is blue cobalt, so maybe it's come from the Mediterranean. This here is a stone you can only find in Cornwall. And here is a beautiful sandstone necklace. So this is really building up a picture of people that were highly skilled. They were farmers, they lived in a community, they were interacting with other communities on the loch, because there's 17 crannogs on our loch, and they were concerned with how they appeared. So this is not really building up a picture of people that were living in a defensive structure. This is a high status family. Otherwise, you wouldn't find objects like this. You'd be finding things like swords, spears, shields. We don't find anything like that at all. These are people that are really kind of concerned with how they look and how they appear to other people. We also have a piece of textile in our collection. At the top, you've got a ruler there. You can see how big the textile fragment is. Very unusual that these kind of textiles survive. This is dated to 390 BC, and it has a very fine weave on it, which you can see here. I won't go into the technical details of that, but it was the first time this kind of weave had been found in Scotland. The one after that was 10th century AD, so it kind of predates that by a long time. This is really what's powering a lot of my research at the Crannog. I'm trying to recreate this, but this is a very precious object. These little strands here are just wider than the thickness of a human hair. So again, this is indicating that these people were very, very skilled, working on looms. But this is an absolutely beautiful object. Every time I look at it, I see something completely different, which sounds really geeky, but there you go. That's my passion. So again, so this is a Crannog here, just a reference. This was the inside of the roof. And these piles going up here, you can see them coming up, supporting the roof there. This roof is made of thatch, and it was 4 tons, so that presses the Crannog down into the loch. This is a view out of the door, and this gives a sense of what it was like inside. It looks a bit cold and unwelcoming, but then I will show you our Graham, our storyteller, LGBT storyteller here, sitting inside the Crannog. And this is kind of how it felt most days when you got the fire on. You can see that it's got a really beautiful atmosphere. And I think that it was very warm. Once you've got the fire on, the whole place heated up. Everybody liked sitting in the Crannog. It really did feel like a community centre. And I think that's because the building is round. And how often, you know, in modern day times, do we sit with other people in a circle? There's something quite special about that. So there is our resident storyteller who tells stories quite often during the year. We're quite welcome to come along to one of our storytelling events. Graham will be doing some queer storytelling very, very soon. So we'll send you out the details of that. I really like this picture. I think it's really beautiful. You've got the smoke rising up from the fire hitting the light. This is what it looked like, and it would reflect the water as well from the loch, and you get all these beautiful patterns of water sitting in the roof. So the smoke rises from the fire, it sits in the roof, and you can use it for smoking your food, storing food, and it keeps the birds out, and it seals the roof with a layer of tar which keeps it waterproof, which is brilliant. And we used to get big storms out on the loch. There was one day when it was 80-mile-an-hour winds coming down the loch, and just down the loch there's a village called Kenmore, and it was really getting, you know, people's greenhouses were getting smashed up, bins going down the road, lots of damage. But our Crannog just stood still, no storm damage whatsoever because the smoke moves round it. So, what is a visit at the Crannog like? We have this outside the front of the Crannog. It's our Progress Pride flag, and that is the first thing that people see. This is how we welcome people at the museum, and it is a statement of our commitment to diversity, and it's a political statement about who we are as a museum, that we welcome everybody and we tolerate no discrimination whatsoever. Museums are not really seen as political spaces. They're normally seen as places where you go and you look around things in a very passive way and you meet a tour guide and it's all rather boring, but that's not who we are at all. We are very explicit in our political stance. So how does that manifest itself in the museum? We have 5 young apprentices working with us. They're now going into their second year. They're from different backgrounds. Normally you need a degree to get into a museum, but we really challenge that. And they are not coming in via the university route. So again, it's access to all at the museum. They're aged between 16 and 20, and they've really thrown themselves into life at the Crannog. So top left, you can see Toby is doing weaving on a prehistoric loom. This is William. He has 4% sight, and he's a bard. So he writes these beautiful seasonal poetries and songs. And here he's playing a lyre. So when I was talking about the lyre bridge earlier on, this is it here. The thing, oh, actually, that's it there. So it's the thing that holds the string up. This is Georgia, who's spinning some wool. She now wants to go into event management as part of her, she's been inspired to do that as part of working here at the Crannog. This is Isabel, who really got into prehistoric textile. She's now going off to University College Dublin, distance learning, to do a master's degree in experimental archaeology. She was so inspired by working at the museum. And this is young Daisy as well. And her hair seems to match the biscuits she's making, but she's got a real passion for cookery. That's what she did at school, and she's able to cook at the museum. So the apprentices, when you come into work at the Crannog Centre, no one tells you what to do. Our management structure is very loose. We basically got horizontal management system. People have freedom of self to pick and choose what they want to do. So we get people to find, what's your passion? That's what we find out. What would you like to do? And then we ask people what resources they need. So it's actually a brilliant place to work. It's really, really dynamic. So you can see what a typical day is like. You can see the shelters that are here. People walk around the site. And here's Isabel talking about textiles. And, you know, you can see people kind of really enjoying themselves. And although it looks like there's older people here, you get people from the age of 4 right through to, I don't know, 99, whatever. And people seem to think that museums are really boring. It's like, well, why would I want to go there? But I think what makes our museum brilliant is the people. You come in and you feel part of a community from the minute you walk through the door, which is absolutely brilliant. So here is some of the kind of work I do. We're looking at Iron Age colour, you know, connecting it back to our textile. We work with various different things. So this is for making your blue dye. This is a plant called woad, and this is been soaked in stale urine that's been sitting out for 6 months. So the visitors really don't like to smell that, but it really gives a real sense of what the Iron Age smelt like. Pink dye, my favourite, and that's come from a kind of lichen that grows on trees. This is from a certain kind of bark, which has been soaked for many months, and you get a beautiful brown colour. And again, this is a plant called madder. No one's heard of these plants, but if I pointed them out to you, you'd recognise them. And here are some of the fabulous colours that you will find from the Iron Age. We've got evidence of all of these. So their clothes were really blingy, if you like. People really liked bright colours back then. So we make these colours and we show them to people. So really, people have really got a sense of how you make the colours, what they look like, what the plants are like, what they smell like, etc., etc., etc. So now we're getting on to experimental archaeology. So experimental archaeology is making things from the past, trying to reconstruct them, to find out what resources people had, what problems they would encounter. And it's really brilliant to, you've got archaeological theory, which can be a bit dry, see the objects in the museum, but it's not until you make them that you find out how skilled people were back in the Iron Age. So here is some of another item that we have in the museum on the left. It's a spindle whirler stone with a hole in it. They drilled through. This is how it's used. They didn't have spinning wheels back in the Iron Age. So you spin your thread and you can dye it different colors, as you see here. So my work over the last 4 years has been about recreating this textile. So I'll show you the process of doing that. Here is our original textile, which we want to recreate. We made a very, very small loom and tried to reconstruct the particular weave, and we succeeded, which you can see on the right hand side here. That lines up to this. The next stage is to make a much bigger loom to see if you can replicate the process. They didn't leave us any text or any artwork, so we have to look at the text and think, what kind of loom would that be made on? On the left hand side, this is an etching. This is only about 2 inches high. That's all the information we had. Someone drawing a picture of someone in the Iron Age. So we now try to replicate this with little or no knowledge. So here you can see Rich is our operations manager and Georgie is one of our apprentices. In January, it was -10. This shows their dedication to build this loom, and we did it without using any nails or anything like that. So here you can see I'm wrapping the wool onto the loom here. I know it looks a bit primitive. This guy here is Ashley Slater, who is a master weaver. He designed the mental health tartan, and he lives in Blairgowrie. It's absolutely brilliant. So we really got him on board because he really does know what he's talking about to finish the loom. So let's have a look what happened when we wove on the loom. Here we go. So now that we've scaled it up, you can actually see that this weaving lines up with this. So it's taken 4 years to get to this point. Our loom now has become a social loom. Everybody that comes around the site has a go at weaving into the loom, and really it tells the story, I suppose, of learning. And the piece of cloth that we have at the end will be owned by everybody. It will have no financial value. It will be maybe 1,000 people will have woven into it, which I think is really important. So what are the reasons for people living in the Crannog? First of all, it was for trade. If you're out in the loch, people can see you, which is really important. It is the use of space as well. So if you cut down, it was densely forested at the side of the loch. So if you're cutting down your trees for your farm, we know they were farming, you don't then build a house right in the middle of that. You build it away from there. And so for the people in the Iron Age, they could build crannogs really easy. We would see that as really difficult. But people back in the Iron Age, it was easy to do, build the crannog out on the water. Also, they had animals as well. They had sheep, pigs and cows, and we know that because we found sheep poo and we found cow poo at the bottom of the loch, which the kids love, and we also found pig's teeth. So that tells us that the animals were in the Crannog. But there were bears, wolves, wildcats and lynx that were roaming around on the shore. So you take your animals away from the Crannog, away from the land. So what did this family structure look like? We think it was about 15 to 20 people. We know that the jobs were shared. Nowadays, we kind of divide jobs into that's what men do and that's what women do. And that wasn't the case at all back in the Iron Age. People just did the jobs that they needed to do. And we would recognize these people as well. There would be the one that spoke too much, the one that just liked to sit in the corner and study. There'd be the one that drank too much, etc., etc., etc. The gender roles were not defined back in the Iron Age. And one of the things I find fascinating when we talk about, you know, them back in the Iron Age, what did they do? I don't like that because we're talking about individual people. And they would be neurodivergent people, and they would be queer people, and there would be non-binary people, and there would be trans people, and there would be a wide variety of people living in the Crannog. And I think to myself, what kind of roles would they have? Because no one was excluded from the community. You wouldn't be able to be. You would need to look after each other. So I think that although we can say that the people back in the past would recognise them, I don't think we would recognise their family structure. Maybe the people that were queer had different jobs. Maybe the people that were neurodivergent were recognised for their skills. Very, very, very different to the kind of communities we had today. And I would hope that rather than people who were different and being discriminated against, that they will be seen as having a special role in the community. I would certainly hope so. And that's an area of research that will open up as we are able to do DNA testing on different grave sites, for example. We'll be able to tell what people were like. So there we go. So that is a Crannog community. And that is our kind of hope about how their community was organised. At the time, there was no government, and there was also no money as well. So people were self-organising, and you'd have to collaborate. If you're living out in the middle of the mountains, in the middle of the loch, you would need to be cooperating with your neighbours. So what does our Crannog community look like? This is a series of events that we have at the Crannog. We are working very closely with UNESCO. This man here, Gamali, has come from, he's working with, he's doing his PhD on music and how music connects people across borders and boundaries. So we had a big storytelling event where we had people from Zimbabwe, people from Ghana, and they were telling their story. And that's something that runs right through the organisation. What is your story? Where are you from? And we sit and listen to that. And I think that's so important. And you start to hear stories that they have a common thread. Gamali here had to leave Ghana. We also had someone from Zimbabwe. Her name is Nardenswa. She had to leave Zimbabwe. And we're also working with someone called Hayab. Hayab is from Eritrea, and which is one of the worst countries in the world to live. They torture people there. Some of the things they do there are terrible. And he escaped, and he wrote his PhD on the kind of experience that he's had. And again, he's now working with us. He's working on the pottery project. So it was his fingers that you saw in the pottery earlier on. We have artists in residence. So this is Taylor, who's been working with us. We designed a really, it's probably the most ridiculous puppet show you've ever seen, deliberately. It's very, very surreal. But here's Taylor working with, doing the puppet show here. This is our Halloween or Samhain event, where we get people from all over Scotland coming, and it's about storytelling, it's about music. And then we burn a big ram at the end, which you can see here. That's the highlight of the evening. And, you know, the flames are going up 20, 30 feet. And I think our festivals, they have quite a kind of anarchic edge to them. People just come and express themselves, and we have circus acts and loads of different stuff. It's really not what you'd expect to see in a museum. We have music festivals as well. These happen, they're going to be happening every week in the summer. This is surviving out at the Samhain Festival. So that's me and one of the other apprentices, Isabel, here. Again, we have music events, kind of traditional music events that happen at the Crannog. So that's absolutely brilliant. We have immersive workshops. These have been really popular over the last year. People come and they sit by the loch, and they might make a basket, or they might learn how to spin wool, or they might do some iron smelting. It doesn't really matter what the craft is. It's the fact that people are connecting together. And during COVID, this was brilliant because people were just starting to come out of lockdown. People are very frightened about being around other people. And we provided a space for people to come that was safe. And I think what we do really well at the museum is we create a container where anything can happen and where stories are shared. So as people were coming out of COVID, they wanted to do something that was outdoors. So people would come on these immersive workshops, sit around the fire in a little tiny space and make objects, go out in the logboat, do whatever they wanted to do. And it really was a way that people reconnected after COVID. And there was, we had 3 ladies that came, and they hadn't seen each other for 2 years. And this was the place that they reconnected. And that was really powerful. I just shut up during that workshop because it was about their conversation and it was about their reconnection. There was something really important about that. Here is a log boat here. People go out in a log boat, which is always a bit of fun. So as you can see, it's kind of very diverse, the activities that we do. It is very much a dynamic place where lots of things are happening all the time. And as I said, we've got these events. We work with local, national, international communities. And I think that's actually really important. Although we're in an area where it's seeming that we're really cut off, we're not. We are completely interconnected with other organisations and communities, and we find that really powerful. So on June the 11th last year, our Crannog burnt down 11:30 at night. Really bad. I can't really talk about it for too long. And it went down. We went up in 6 minutes. It was really bad. Our director called us at 11:30 to get your ass down to the Crannog. And we all just stood there, and there was just this empty void out on the loch. The Crannog was quite iconic. Everybody kind of recognised it as they were driving down the loch, and all of a sudden it wasn't there. It was one of probably the worst nights ever. We don't know what started the fire. What we do know was it was a very hot, dry evening. There were people having barbecues along the beach, and it could just be that a spark had come from one of the barbecues. It sat in the thatch. As you can see, it was all made of reeds, and it had just worked its way down, and then it had dropped onto the floor of the Crannog, smouldered, and the whole thing went up. But anyway, it was very, very sad, but we were in the process of moving over to the other side of the water to build a new museum. We've outgrown this site, it's too small, and we have bought a site over the other side of the loch that's 12 times the size of this one, and we are going to slowly move over there during this year. And we're going to shut our current site in December, and we're going to move over to Dallerb. I think that's actually really important. I think if maybe we hadn't had that as an ambition, or if that wasn't happening, I don't know what we would have all felt like. So although the fire was really bad when it happened, it was really terrible. We had an option of kind of, are we going to take a month off? Are we going to rebuild? What are we going to do? But then we all decided, no, we're going to come back to work 4 days later. And we just told the story. It just became part of the story of the Crannog, and all the tour guides were crying. And after a while, we decided not to hide that. We would just say, this is a really important community space. It's not just a reconstruction of a building of the past, which has no value. It becomes something really important to us. And now it is just out on the stumps. Maybe if I turn the camera around, I don't know if you'll be able to see this. I can't see what you're looking at over there, but you can see the stump sticking out over the water. And that's it. That's all that's left. But it doesn't matter now. We are focusing on our new site, and I think what it proved is how resilient we are. We've come through COVID. Everybody was tired. The fire happened, and we survived and have come back stronger because of our community spirit. And I think both within the team and with our external friends and communities across the world. And it was absolutely beautiful to see the generosity of people's spirit, I think. We are still raising money on Just Giving, so I can send you the link for that. We've been given £2.3 million to build a new museum, but we still need money to kind of keep going here. So any help would be more than appreciated, including coming and volunteering, etc., etc., etc. You'd be more than welcome. So this is the first drawing of how the museum will look. There's a 9-inch village here. That's going to be pretty similar to the one that we've got on site at the moment, but we won't have all the canvas roofs on the shelters. They're all going to be made from different kinds of, we're going to make buildings out of peat, turf, loads of different buildings here for textiles, cooking, etc., etc., etc. And then we've got a Crannog that goes out onto the water. So when we reopen in November, we're going to do a soft opening. People will be able to have a look at the buildings being built and the crannog being built as well. So if anybody comes and wants to volunteer, help make a crannog, you'd be more than welcome. Phase 2, which is going to happen in a couple of years, another crannog from a different time period, and then another crannog here in phase 3. So it's going to be ongoing. We're going to have massive music events. We're going to have big storytelling festivals. There's going to be loads on. Again, so it's not just going to be like traipsing around the village and just looking at some objects from the past. It's going to be very, very vibrant, and we're really going to build our community there. So that's actually really important. When we bought the land, the Forestry Commission gave us a quote for what they wanted. We kind of halved that, and then they said, no, we're not going to give it you for that amount. We're not going to give it you for 22,000, whatever it was. A couple of days later, they said, because of the work you want to do, because your community is so diverse, I think because you're a political space, what you want to achieve, we'll give it you for £1. So that was almost like a rubber stamp of how important our museum is going to be perceived. The whole museum is going to be completely off-grid as well. We're hoping that it's going to be the greenest museum in Scotland. So we've really got that to look forward to. So thank you very much for listening to my talk. And there we are, the Progress Pride flag. This is what we stand for. We look forward to seeing you very soon, maybe at the end of spring, beginning of summer. So now I'll hand over to you, Matt. Thank you ever so much.
Jason, thank you very much for your talk there. That was absolutely fantastic, and so much that came out of it as well. So much learned around the Iron Age, so much about the crannog as well, and all the the hard amount of graft and work and diving deep to find things, find artifacts. I found it absolutely outstanding around the whole discovering numbers of families and crannogs and the animals in crannogs as well, and just that whole sort of sense of community. And I think it's almost sort of maybe realized of today of in some ways we have sort of circled back in in some parts in terms of diversity, and in terms of different people coming together, sort of building that sense of community from their background, from their interests. And I was just thinking with that, do you think there's maybe learnings that we could take from the Iron Age and from life in crannogs that we could maybe focus on more today? Do you think there's things that do reflect on that now?
Yeah, I think that if we look back at how the communities both interact with each other in terms of their family structure, which I said we don't understand, and I think how people interact with each other as well, I think that's really important. I think we live in a very kind of individualistic, kind of atomized kind of communities at the moment. Everything seems really fragmented, and I think we could take great inspiration from them. And I'm not saying we should go back and live in kind of round huts on the land, but I think it's more about how we can relate to each other. I think also maybe they give us a sense of how to interact with the environment. The people were living with the environment rather than working against it. They weren't taking advantage of it. And I think there's a very maybe kind of green philosophy that's we can definitely be inspired by 100%. I think a lot of people now are kind of returning to things like heritage craft. And I think that one of the things we have at the museum is the emphasis on the slow. We need to all slow down a bit, and if something takes, I don't know, an hour to do, switch off your phone and do something else. I think it's actually really good for your mental health that time takes time. So I would say, think about how communities interact. How do I interact with my community? How does my community interact with other communities, which kind of talking about intersectionality, and what can I do in my life to slow down because it's good for my mental health? So I think those are maybe the main lessons that we can be inspired by, and all that just some of these little fragments of objects found at the bottom of the loch.
Absolutely, yeah. And do you think that's something that maybe COVID, sort of moving on from that's something that we should really focus on, is around, it's not all about the digital world. I think a lot of, folk in, the LGBT community are sort of quite tired now almost of, online virtual reality, that sort of thing, and just sort of that, engagement through Zoom calls and everything, and, actually want to get back out and about, but having, a slight hesitancy around that as well of, in terms of COVID, in terms of, keeping safe, that side of things. And, it's almost like, there's been mention of hybrid along the way, but do you feel that's more the fact of, getting outdoors, doing new things, learning new things? Do you think that will be kind of supportive in that way?
I think it is about that. I think it is about outdoor. I think it is about being outdoors, but I think it's about connecting with other people outdoors and having a focus. you know, it's not just about going for a walk. I think it's about connecting to people's stories. And one of the things we do here, you know, we tell the story of the people who lived on the Crannog, but I think we also have a space here where we're sitting around listening to where other people have come from. And it's not about shouting people down. It's about creating a quiet space, being outside, but listening to other people's stories, where they've come from, what inspires them. And I think that that's something that's very powerful. I think that's something that's lost, the power of storytelling. I think people see storytelling as, you know, sitting around Harry Potter or whatever that is. But I think there's a great power in finding out where people are from. And I think that's quite a radical act to actually happen in a museum. We don't do it enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, you know, this year almost plays to your advantage with being Scotland Years of Stories and sort of the ability
Yeah.
to sort of, you know, share stories through that. I think, you
Yeah.
know, here we've also sort of run a separate podcast as well, which again opened eyes in
Yeah.
terms of, you know, particularly around New Scots and, you know, those that moved from elsewhere around the world and sort of experience things
Yeah.
differently, in terms
Yeah.
of LGBT livelihoods, and sort of hearing those different stories, hearing those different influences almost in their life and sort of what, you know, moved them this way and everything. So I think that's certainly something of, you know, hearing from people's background, hearing those lived experiences is really important. Is there things there that you do in terms of, you know, when people sort of tell their stories, that side of things? Do you sort of get that feeling that we sort of create our own history in some way?
I think that depends on context. I mean, if we think about Hayab from Eritrea, I don't think he has created his own history. I think history has kind of, I think he's very much got outside, he's had outside influence, you know, horrific things have happened to him. I think that when you get people of a similar mindset together, I think there you can create your own history 100%. I think that can be very powerful. I think that really does depend on context. But I think also having maybe the stories of people with shared identity. It's not that we rewrite history. I think we learn to understand it differently, and I think you can go through a paradigm shift. Is it kind of creating your own history, or is it just understanding it? I'm not sure. I'm sure there's a whole other debate around that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the sort of final things really is, you know, people do want to, you know, come and get the sort of chronic experience and everything. Sort of what can people do? What you sort of got sort of coming up? What's in the works for you there?
I think first of all, we've got our Facebook page, we've got our Instagram page. So just go to Scottish Crannog Centre on both of those platforms. I think also crannog.co.uk. We have all our events coming up, what's going on, what's happening, how much it is. And I think all the immersive workshops are now up on the site. The most popular one is called Day in the Life. That's half-day workshop. You get your lunch, come and sit round by the fire. You can try 4 Iron Age crafts. It doesn't matter if you mess it up. It's not about that. That seems to be our most popular one. But yeah, just check in on our website and see what's on. It's updated. And yeah, it'd be brilliant to see everybody. You'd be more than welcome.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Jason. Thank you very much for your time. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Hope you get some time by the loch still this afternoon while it's still good weather for us. But yeah, thank you very much for all your time and take care.
Yeah.
We'll see you soon.
Perfect. Bye.
And thank you for joining us on this call as well. It's been the live stream from the Scottish Crannog Talks. It's been an absolutely fantastic experience to hear all about the Crannog and all of what they got to offer out in Kenmore. And it's honestly very much sounds like it's worth a day. I would certainly be working on to a music festival very soon, and certainly one of those storytelling events as well. So make sure you head over to crannog.co.uk. You can certainly get everything booked up there and see what's coming up later in the year, and even look forward to the completely new site as well on the other side of the loch.
Yeah.
That's all to look forward to, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.